It was supposed to be the perfect neighborhood, a fresh start for my wife Sarah and me, a new chapter in our lives away from the bustling city and its chaos. Meadowbrook Estates was everything we had hoped for: clean streets, manicured lawns, neighbors who smiled and waved when you drove by. A place where families could grow, where people took pride in their homes and where, for once, we could live in peace. But I never imagined that the drama would start with something as innocent as hanging a military uniform on the clothesline. Sarah had been my rock for over a decade. She served in the military for 15 years, rising to the rank of colonel before retiring. Her service was her life, her pride, her identity. We had moved to Meadowbrook to escape the stress of city living, to give our family the kind of stability Sarah had always fought for. But that perfect little world we had imagined began to crumble the day Sarah hung her uniform outside. It wasn't a grand display or a deliberate statement, it was just a simple act of practicality. It was spring, the weather was mild, and Sarah had just done a load of laundry. She carefully clipped her uniform, the digital camouflage pattern sharp and clear, to the clothesline in our backyard. It was an ordinary moment, one of those quiet, almost imperceptible acts of life that most people would never notice. But Katherine Harrison, the HOA president, noticed. The woman who had welcomed us to Meadowbrook with a smile and plate of chocolate chip cookies, who had introduced herself with the charm of someone who truly cared about the community, now stood on our doorstep with a new agenda. Her smile had changed from friendly to something more calculating. She no longer held a plate of cookies but a look of curiosity that bordered on obsession. I can still remember the way her eyes locked on the uniform, like a heat-seeking missile. "Oh my goodness, that uniform is absolutely beautiful," she had gushed, her voice reaching a pitch that could have shattered glass. Her questions came rapid fire, each one more invasive than the last. Where did Sarah serve? What was her job in the military? How many deployments had she been on? The questions, though dressed up as casual conversation, had a sharp edge to them. Katherine leaned in closer with every inquiry, her body language shifting from friendly curiosity to something far more intense. It felt less like a neighborly chat and more like an interrogation. My heart began to race as I watched the exchange. Something didn't feel right. Sarah, as always, handled it with grace. She was polite, maintaining her composure, but there was a tension in her posture that I could sense even though she wasn't showing it. I had spent enough years with Sarah to recognize when something was off, and this felt wrong. Katherine's obsession with Sarah's military history was unsettling. She wasn't admiring the uniform, she was scrutinizing it, as if it were a puzzle she was trying to solve. "Tell me, what unit were you with? Did you ever work with classified materials? Have you maintained your security clearance?" Katherine asked, each question more probing than the last. Her voice was so sweet, so friendly, but her eyes, the way they flickered with an almost predatory focus, told a different story. I could feel the unease in the air, thickening with every question Katherine asked. Sarah's responses were short, polite, but I could tell she was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. I stood at the window, watching the whole exchange, my mind racing. What was Katherine really after? Was she just trying to make small talk, or was she trying to dig into something deeper? When Katherine left, she made sure to send an email to the entire community. The subject line was innocuous enough: urgent new military display guidelines effective immediately, but the content was far from routine. The message detailed new HOA policies requiring verification for anyone displaying military memorabilia. It wasn't just about flags or decorations, it was aimed squarely at Sarah's uniform, and it was clear that Katherine had crafted these rules specifically with us in mind. Sarah sat down with the email in her hands, reading it over and over again. I could see her face change from confusion to anger, but there was something else too, something deeper. It was a cold calculation that I had never seen before. "Marcus, this isn't about HOA rules," she said quietly, her eyes narrowing. "She's testing me." I didn't understand what she meant at first. Testing for what? But when I looked into Sarah's eyes, I saw something that made my blood run cold. She wasn't surprised by this move. She was ready for it. Like she had been expecting this exact challenge all along. And that's when it hit me. Sarah wasn't just any retired colonel. She had secrets that ran deeper than I could have imagined. Little did I know, this small suburban drama over a military uniform would soon spiral into something much bigger. Katherine had no idea who she was dealing with. And neither did I. The truth would shatter everything, and what started as a simple dispute over a piece of clothing would expose lies, secrets, and a betrayal that would change our lives forever. The morning after Katherine's email, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right. Sarah was handling it in her usual calm, composed way, but I could sense her unease. She'd been through tough situations before, but this was something different. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just walked into a trap, and neither of us fully understood what was coming next. We spent the morning in silence. Sarah was at the kitchen table, flipping through the thick binder of HOA regulations, her mind clearly elsewhere. I knew that look, the way she scanned documents not just for information but for loopholes, for strategy. She had a mind like a steel trap, always calculating, always 3 steps ahead. But now, there was an edge to it. A sharpness I hadn't seen before. "I'm not going to give her what she wants," Sarah said suddenly, breaking the silence. "This isn't about a uniform. It's about power. She's testing me, Marcus. She's looking for a way to prove that I'm a fraud." I blinked, trying to process what she meant. "Testing you? Over a uniform?" Sarah's eyes narrowed, her lips forming a tight line. "It's not just about the uniform. It's about control. If I show her my documentation, she wins. She gets to decide what's real and what isn't. And I'm not going to let her do that." I stood there, stunned, not fully understanding what Sarah was trying to say. To me, Katherine was just an overzealous HOA president trying to enforce some ridiculous rule about military displays. But Sarah was seeing something more, something darker, and that realization sent a chill down my spine. That afternoon, things took an unexpected turn. Katherine, never one to back down from a challenge, showed up at our house once again. This time, she wasn't carrying cookies. She wasn't offering pleasantries. She was on a mission, her eyes sharp and calculating as she stood on our porch, her body rigid with purpose. "Sarah," Katherine began, her voice colder than I had ever heard it, "I'm giving you one last chance. Provide verification of your military service. If you don't, I will have no choice but to escalate this to the board." I felt Sarah stiffen beside me, her posture straightening as if she were preparing for a battle she knew was coming. I watched Katherine closely, and for the first time, I saw the raw desperation in her eyes. This wasn't just about following the rules for her, it was personal. "I've already told you, Katherine," Sarah responded, her voice measured, calm, but filled with an undercurrent of steel, "I'm not going to provide personal military documentation. It's private, protected by federal law, and frankly, it's none of your business. I'm not playing your game." Katherine's lips tightened, her eyes flashing with anger, but she held herself together just barely. "You're making a huge mistake, Sarah. You can't just walk around here pretending to be something you're not. You're disrespecting the very people you claim to support. You're a fraud." It was like a switch flipped inside me. Katherine wasn't just accusing Sarah of something trivial anymore, she was going straight for her character, her honor, her entire identity. I could see the cracks in Katherine's perfect facade. Her facade of politeness and neighborly charm, shifting. Beneath it, there was something ugly. Something deeply rooted in fear and jealousy. "You know nothing about me, Katherine," Sarah said, her voice unwavering. "I've served my country with distinction. I don't need to prove it to you or anyone else. I watched Catherine's face redden with rage, her chest rising and falling with each breath, her mind spinning, looking for a way to bring Sarah down. I could feel the tension crackling in the air between them, two women locked in a silent, intense battle for power and respect, and neither of them willing to back down. Katherine turned to leave, but not before throwing one last barb. "You'll regret this. Trust me. I will make sure the entire neighborhood knows exactly what you're hiding." As soon as she was gone, Sarah let out a long breath, the weight of the moment crashing over her. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched at her sides. She was trying to hold it together, but I could tell this was taking a toll on her. Katherine wasn't just attacking Sarah's military service, she was attacking everything Sarah stood for. And that was something Sarah wasn't going to let slide. "We need to get ahead of this," Sarah said quietly, her voice determined. "Katherine's already planted the seed of doubt. It's not going to stop until we do something about it. She's going to drag this out until we can't take it anymore." I nodded, my mind racing with the implications of what Sarah had just said. Katherine wasn't just a neighbor anymore. She had turned into something more dangerous, more malicious, a force that wouldn't rest until she had destroyed everything Sarah had worked so hard for. That night, Sarah sat down at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of her. She was researching, studying, and I could see the wheels turning in her head as she prepared for the next step. This wasn't just about responding to a petty HOA dispute. This was about something much larger, a fight for her dignity, her honor, and her future. I stood by her, unsure of what was coming next, but knowing deep down that whatever it was, it would change everything. Katherine had underestimated Sarah. She had no idea what she had just provoked. And neither did I. The days that followed felt like we were living in a pressure cooker, each moment building toward an inevitable explosion. Katherine's campaign against Sarah escalated in ways I never could have anticipated. It wasn't just about the HOA anymore. It was personal. Every encounter, every conversation, every glance from a neighbor now seemed laced with suspicion, doubt, and fear. Katherine had expertly turned the neighborhood against us, manipulating everyone's emotions, using the very thing Sarah had worked so hard for, her military service, as a weapon. But what Katherine didn't realize was that she wasn't dealing with just any retired colonel. Sarah was a woman of immense strength, discipline, and patience, traits she'd honed over years of service, but also traits that made her far more dangerous than Katherine could ever imagine. She wasn't about to let this ridiculous power struggle destroy her or her reputation. Sarah wasn't one to back down, and Katherine had no idea what she was getting herself into. One evening, after another tense encounter with Katherine, Sarah pulled me aside. Her expression was unreadable, her face set in that familiar, determined mask that I had come to know so well over the years. I could tell she was about to share something important, something that would change everything. "Marcus, I've been working on a plan," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of urgency in it that made my heart race. "I've been gathering evidence. I've been documenting everything Katherine's been doing. Her emails, her threats, the false claims, everything. I've already reached out to some people who can help." I stared at her, my mind spinning. "Help? What do you mean by help?" Sarah's eyes locked with mine, and for the first time, I saw something that terrified me, the full scope of the battle she was about to enter. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. This had become a fight for survival. A fight to expose the truth, no matter the cost. "I'm going to take this to the authorities, Marcus. I'm going to expose everything Katherine's been hiding. Her lies, her manipulations, the way she's been using her fake military background to control this neighborhood for years. She's been getting away with it for far too long. It ends now." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. My stomach twisted in knots as I realized just how deep this went. Sarah wasn't just protecting herself. She was about to take on a whole system of lies and deception that had been festering beneath the surface of Meadowbrook Estates. This wasn't going to be easy, and it certainly wasn't going to be pretty. But as Sarah spoke, I knew she was right. Katherine had pushed too far, and it was time for the truth to come to light. No more hiding. No more pretending. Katherine Harrison wasn't just a misguided neighbor, she was a criminal, and it was time to expose her for what she truly was. Over the next few days, Sarah worked tirelessly, gathering everything she could to support her case. Every email from Katherine, every piece of evidence that showed how she had manipulated the HOA, every phone call she had made threatening Sarah, it was all there, laid out in a meticulous and organized fashion. But Sarah wasn't just documenting Katherine's actions, she was also preparing for the fallout. She knew that once she made her move, there would be no turning back. The consequences would be immense, and the community would never be the same. It wasn't until one late afternoon, as I sat in the living room, that everything changed. The doorbell rang, and when I opened it, I was met with a sight I hadn't expected, a sheriff's deputy standing on the other side, his uniform neat and his expression stern. "Are you Marcus Walker?" he asked, his voice calm but authoritative. I nodded, my heart skipping a beat. "Yes, I am." "What's going on?" The deputy didn't waste any time. "I'm here regarding an emergency call that was made earlier this morning. We've been informed that there's a possible case of stolen valor going on in this neighborhood. A woman has made allegations regarding your wife, Sarah Walker, and her military service. We need to talk to both of you immediately." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Katherine had escalated the situation even further. She wasn't just making empty threats anymore. She had involved law enforcement, bringing her false accusations to the authorities in an attempt to destroy Sarah's life. "Do you have any idea why this is happening?" I asked, feeling a surge of anger rising in my chest. The deputy looked at me with sympathy but said nothing, only handing me a card with his contact information on it. "We're just doing our job, sir. But I suggest you speak with your wife before we proceed. If you'd like to speak to the authorities, you're welcome to come with us." I felt the weight of his words crash down on me, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, I began to fear what would come next. Sarah was strong, yes. But this was something entirely different. This was no longer just a neighborhood dispute. This was a federal issue, and Katherine was playing her cards in a way that threatened to unravel everything. I went inside to find Sarah, who was already sitting at the kitchen table, looking as calm and composed as ever. But I could see the flicker of worry in her eyes, the first sign of uncertainty I had seen from her in weeks. "I just got a visit from a sheriff," I said, my voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and frustration. "They're investigating the claims Katherine made about stolen valor. They're taking this to the next level." Sarah didn't react immediately. She just sat there for a moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup, as though she were calculating every possible outcome. Finally, she looked at me, her eyes hardening with resolve. "This is exactly what she wanted," Sarah said, her voice steady but with a cold edge. "She wants to destroy me, to tear apart everything I've worked for. But she doesn't know who she's dealing with. I won't let her get away with this." I watched her stand up, her posture straightening as if she were preparing for battle. It wasn't just about proving her military service anymore. It was about something far greater. Her integrity, her honor, and her future. And Katherine had just made a fatal mistake by pushing her too far. "Do you trust me, Marcus?" Sarah asked, her gaze piercing. I nodded without hesitation. "Of course, I do. But what are we going to do next?" Sarah took a deep breath, her voice steady and full of determination. "We're going to expose Katherine for what she is. We're going to make sure she's held accountable. But first, we need to gather the right people. We need to make sure that when the truth comes out, it doesn't just stop at the HOA. This is bigger than that. This is about justice." The moment Sarah spoke those words, I realized just how much she had been holding back. She had been preparing for this, and she wasn't going to let Katherine tear apart everything she had built. But I also knew that this was no longer just a fight for our reputation. This was a fight for our lives. The next few days were a blur of tension, uncertainty, and preparation. Sarah was in full operational mode, and though I was still trying to wrap my head around everything, I could sense the shift in her demeanor. She was methodical, precise, like a machine in motion, and every move she made was calculated for the battle ahead. But even as she worked tirelessly to gather evidence, a gnawing sense of dread began to eat at me. We had no idea how deep Katherine's web of lies and manipulation stretched, or how much damage she had already done. It was the night after the sheriff's visit when Sarah looked at me across the dinner table, her eyes steady and unwavering. "We're not just fighting for my reputation anymore, Marcus. This has gone too far," she said quietly, as if the weight of her own words was finally settling in. "Katherine isn't just a concerned neighbor. She's using the community's trust to manipulate everything. She wants control, and she's willing to tear everything down to get it." I could feel the gravity of the situation settle in the pit of my stomach. This was no longer just a petty fight over a uniform. This was something much bigger. Katherine's pursuit of power wasn't just about intimidating Sarah, it was about destroying anyone who got in her way. The truth was she wasn't just gunning for Sarah, she was trying to take down the entire neighborhood, and she was using Sarah's military background as the weapon. That night, Sarah took her research to the next level. She set up her laptop on the kitchen table, pulling up databases and documents I didn't recognize, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she scrolled through pages of public records, military files, and news reports. She was tracking every move Katherine had made in previous neighborhoods. There was a pattern. A disturbing one. Katherine wasn't new to this. In fact, she had done the same thing in 3 other communities, always managing to become the HOA president and always targeting military families. She'd fabricated her own military background in each of these communities, playing the role of a patriotic supporter while undermining the real veterans who dared to challenge her. "Marcus," Sarah said, her voice tinged with disgust as she scrolled through more documents, "this isn't just a coincidence. This is a game to her. She has been doing this for years. She moves into a neighborhood, gains the trust of the community, then targets military families, asking for proof of their service and exploiting their credibility. She has a history of making false claims about veterans and forcing them to prove their legitimacy." I leaned in closer, my heart sinking as I saw the evidence unfold before me. Katherine wasn't just a neighbor, she was a predator, preying on the very people who had given everything for their country. And Sarah, my wife, had been her next target. "We need to expose her," Sarah continued, her voice now filled with a quiet fury. "We need to gather everything we can. The community deserves to know what she's been doing, and if we don't stop her, she'll do it again. She'll destroy another family." But as Sarah dove deeper into her research, a realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Katherine wasn't just hiding behind the HOA regulations or playing petty neighborhood games, she had crossed a line. She had involved the police, escalated everything to the point where real lives were at stake. She had made a 911 call accusing Sarah of fraud, a move that would forever stain our record and make it almost impossible for us to clear our names if things went wrong. I stood up from the table, running my hands through my hair in frustration. What if it's too late? What if we can't fix this? Katherine has already got the law involved, and she's got a whole network of people believing her lies. We're fighting an entire community of people who've been manipulated into thinking she's the victim. Sarah looked up at me, her eyes steely and determined. "Then we expose her. If the truth is out there, no one can deny it. We have to fight back, Marcus. If we don't, we let her win. We let her destroy us, destroy this neighborhood, destroy everything we've worked for." I stared at her for a long moment. There was no fear in her voice, no hesitation. She was ready for this fight. She had been ready all along. Over the next few days, Sarah worked relentlessly. She filed public records requests, reached out to former neighbors from the communities Katherine had targeted, and began preparing a full report on everything Katherine had done. She didn't just want to expose Katherine for what she was doing, she wanted to make sure Katherine never had the power to do this to anyone again. But Katherine wasn't just sitting idle. The more Sarah uncovered, the more dangerous Katherine became. It was like she could feel the walls closing in, and she wasn't about to back down without a fight. She started planting evidence at our doorstep, unmarked packages filled with surveillance gear, technical manuals, and photographs of military installations. Sarah knew immediately that Katherine was trying to frame her for something she hadn't done. She was desperate to prove her false claims, to paint Sarah as the fraud she had already decided her to be. The situation was becoming more surreal by the day. Katherine's paranoia was contagious, and the neighbors, once friendly faces who waved from their porches, were now watching us like we were the enemy. Everywhere we went, there was a sense of tension in the air. Sarah's early morning runs became suspect. Every package delivered to our house was met with suspicious glances. People whispered when we walked by, and the polite smiles that had once greeted us now carried an undercurrent of distrust. It was all part of Katherine's plan to isolate us, to break us down piece by piece, and to turn the entire community against us. She had created a world of fear and division, and she was using our private lives as the battleground. But Sarah wasn't going to let her win. One evening, Sarah came to me with a serious look on her face. "Marcus, I need you to trust me. We have one shot at this. I've contacted someone who can help us, someone who knows how to handle people like Katherine. But I need to make sure we have everything in place before we go public." "Who's this person?" I asked, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in weeks. "A former colleague from the military," Sarah replied. "They have connections with federal investigators who specialize in stolen Valor cases. We're going to take this to the next level. Katherine is going to pay for everything she's done, and I'm not going to let her destroy any more lives." I nodded, feeling a surge of pride for Sarah, but also a tinge of fear. We were stepping into dangerous territory. Once we made the move, there would be no going back. But in that moment, I realized just how far we had come. We weren't fighting just for our reputation anymore, we were fighting for the truth, for justice, and for the future of our neighborhood. And the truth, as we would soon learn, had a way of exposing even the most carefully constructed lies. The day we decided to make our move felt surreal, as if the world outside had slowed to a crawl. Sarah had been preparing for this moment for days, gathering every piece of evidence, every email, every phone call Katherine had made. She had connected with her former military colleague, who turned out to be exactly who we needed, someone with the right resources, the right connections, and the experience to take down someone like Katherine. The clock was ticking, and the weight of what we were about to do hung heavy in the air. Katherine had no idea what was coming. She was still playing her games, still trying to manipulate the community with her false accusations and fabricated storylines. But what she didn't realize was that Sarah had been playing a much smarter game from the beginning. She had let Katherine make her moves, gather her support, and trap herself in a web of lies. Sarah had been silently preparing the evidence for the one final blow. And now, it was time to strike. The first step was contacting the authorities, real authorities. Not just the local sheriff's department, but the federal agency that specialized in stolen Valor cases. Sarah had made sure that everything we had gathered was airtight. There was no room for doubt. The emails Katherine had sent out, the false claims of military service, the harassment of military families, everything was ready for submission. But it wasn't just about reporting Katherine anymore. This was about exposing her, dismantling the power she had so carefully built, and making sure she could never do this to anyone else again. The thing was, Katherine had underestimated Sarah. She had no idea who she was really dealing with. As we prepared to submit the evidence, Sarah turned to me, her face grim. "Marcus, this is bigger than just a neighborhood dispute. Katherine has manipulated everyone around us. She's turned this whole community into her personal pawn. If we don't do something now, she'll continue using her position to hurt people, to control them. This isn't just about proving my military service, it's about protecting everyone she's targeted." I nodded, feeling a surge of anger toward Katherine and a deep sense of pride in Sarah. She wasn't just my wife, she was a force to be reckoned with. And Katherine had no idea how far Sarah was willing to go to put an end to this madness. As we submitted the evidence to the federal authorities, I couldn't shake the sense of relief that washed over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we were on the verge of something that would change everything. Katherine had spent so much time building a facade of respectability, of authority, but now, it was crumbling. She had made one mistake after another, and now the walls were closing in. But even as we prepared to face the inevitable fallout, new, unexpected challenge emerged. Katherine, never one to back down, had decided to take things even further. She wasn't going to let us expose her without a fight. As the federal investigation into her fraudulent military claims gained momentum, she began to escalate her tactics. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find Sarah on the phone, her face pale, her expression tight with tension. As she hung up the phone, I could see the worry in her eyes. "What is it?" I asked, my heart sinking. "Katherine's gone too far," Sarah said quietly, her voice full of frustration. "She's filed a defamation lawsuit against me, claiming that I've been slandering her and causing damage to her reputation. She's trying to make this look like it's all about me trying to ruin her good name. It's not enough that she's already involved the authorities, now she's trying to turn the narrative. She's trying to paint herself as the victim." I couldn't believe it. Katherine wasn't just manipulating the neighbors anymore. She was using the legal system to retaliate, to twist the truth to suit her own agenda. She was desperate. Desperate to hold on to whatever little control she had left. But what Katherine didn't realize was that she had already lost. "This is exactly what she does," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the anger I could see brewing inside her. "She's trying to distract everyone from the truth. She knows the investigation is moving forward, and now she's trying to drag me through the mud to make herself look innocent. It's not going to work. We've come too far. The truth is already out there." And Sarah was right. The truth had already started to unravel. It was too late for Katherine to pretend to be the victim. The wheels of justice were already in motion, and there was no stopping them now. But even as we prepared for the legal battle that lay ahead, there was one final obstacle, one last piece of Katherine's plan that we had to overcome. She had made one last, desperate attempt to divide the community, to turn the neighbors against us before the truth could come out. She called a special HOA meeting, inviting all the residents to attend, claiming that this was a critical issue for the safety and integrity of the community. It was all part of her campaign to convince everyone that we were the problem, that we were the ones destroying the neighborhood, and that she was just doing her job to protect the community. We knew this meeting was coming. Sarah had already reached out to some of the more level-headed neighbors, the ones who had begun to question Katherine's motives. But Katherine wasn't going to make this easy. She knew this meeting would be her last chance to regain control, to save herself from the inevitable exposure. And that's when Sarah did something I never expected. She made a decision that would change everything. "I'm going to that meeting," Sarah said, her voice calm, but with an edge of finality. "And I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. It's time for Katherine to face what she's done." I stared at her, my heart racing. The stakes had never been higher. Katherine had turned the entire community into a battleground, and now it was up to Sarah to finish it. But I knew, deep down, that Sarah was more than capable of handling whatever came next. She wasn't just going to defend herself, she was going to take down everything Katherine had built. We arrived at the community center that evening, the place where everything had started. As we walked inside, the room was filled with tension. People were talking in hushed voices, some looking at us with suspicion, others with curiosity. Katherine was at the front of the room, standing tall, her face a mask of righteous fury. But as soon as Sarah stepped forward, everything changed. There was no fear in her eyes, no hesitation in her voice. She stood tall, commanding the room's attention with nothing more than her presence. Katherine's carefully crafted image of herself as a patriotic hero, a defender of the community, began to crumble. Sarah wasn't just a retired colonel, she was a woman who had earned her place, who had fought for everything she had, and now she was going to expose Katherine for what she really was. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, her voice clear and unwavering, "I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to expose the truth. Katherine Harrison is a fraud. She has been manipulating this community, using her fake military service to gain power and control. And I've gathered everything I need to prove it." The room fell into stunned silence as Sarah laid out the evidence, piece by piece, exposing Katherine's lies and manipulations. The truth was undeniable. Katherine had built her entire life on deceit, using the respect of the community and the country's military veterans to further her own agenda. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that Katherine had lost. Her supporters were gone, her facade had shattered, and the community was beginning to see the truth. But it wasn't over yet. Katherine wasn't going to go down without one last attempt to take Sarah down with her. The aftermath of that HOA meeting was nothing short of explosive. Katherine's mask had slipped, and the damage was done. The truth was out, and for the first time in months, Sarah and I felt a sense of relief, if only for a fleeting moment. But we knew it wasn't over. Katherine wasn't the kind of person to go down without a fight, and we braced ourselves for the consequences of exposing her for what she really was. The next morning, I was scrolling through my phone, checking emails when I saw a message from one of our neighbors. It was short, but the words hit hard. "You did the right thing. We're behind you, Sarah. Katherine can't fool us anymore." It was just one message, but it meant everything. The community was starting to shift. People were waking up to the reality of what had been happening under their noses, and they were beginning to take sides. Katherine's web of manipulation was unraveling faster than she could keep up with. One by one, the neighbors who had supported her began to reconsider their stance. Slowly, but surely, the tide was turning in our favor. Despite the positive shift, we knew the worst was yet to come. The federal investigation was still ongoing, and Katherine's legal battle was just beginning. Her defamation suit against Sarah had no merit, but it was part of her last-ditch effort to make us question ourselves, to make us believe we were in the wrong. It wasn't about justice for her, it was about revenge. But as the days passed, Sarah remained steadfast. She didn't allow Katherine's threats or her desperate attempts to spin the narrative to rattle her. Sarah knew that the truth was on her side, and that was all that mattered. She kept her focus on the bigger picture. Katherine was going to be exposed for what she was, and the community would heal. It wasn't just the legal side of things that was weighing on us anymore. The emotional toll was heavy. Every time we left the house, there was an undercurrent of tension. We could feel eyes on us, whispers behind our backs, and the weight of every conversation that had shifted because of Katherine's lies. But Sarah didn't let it consume her. She held her head high, knowing that this battle wasn't just about her or me, it was about the integrity of the entire community. Finally, the day came when we received the letter we had been waiting for. Katherine was officially facing federal charges for fraud, identity theft, and a string of other crimes. The extent of her manipulation was far more profound than we had ever imagined. Katherine had been stealing veteran benefits for years, running a multi-state fraud scheme, and using her position as HOA president to target military families, all while hiding behind a fabricated military background. The truth had finally come to light, and Katherine's reign of terror was over. But even as the federal agents led Katherine away in handcuffs, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of relief and sadness. She had spent years manipulating people, using their respect for military service to elevate herself, and in the end, it had all come crashing down. The community had been torn apart by her lies, and although justice had been served, it was hard to ignore the emotional scars that remained. As the weeks passed, things slowly began to return to normal. The neighborhood started to rebuild, piece by piece. People who had once been divided by fear and manipulation were now coming together, sharing their stories, apologizing for doubting Sarah, and realizing that they had been taken in by Katherine's false sense of authority. The healing process was slow, but it was happening. Sarah and I, too, found our own sense of peace as we reflected on everything that had happened. What started as a simple neighborhood dispute over a uniform had turned into something far bigger. The truth, once buried beneath layers of lies, had been exposed, and it had changed everything, not just for Sarah and me, but for the entire community. One evening, as we sat on our front porch, watching the sun set over the neighborhood, Sarah turned to me and smiled. There was a calmness in her eyes, a peace that hadn't been there before. "Do you remember when we first moved here?" she asked softly. "When we thought we had found paradise?" I smiled, thinking back to the day we arrived in Meadowbrook Estates. The perfect lawns, the polite neighbors, and the feeling that we had finally found a place where we could build a peaceful life. "I remember," I said, my voice filled with warmth. "It feels like a lifetime ago now." Sarah chuckled softly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Funny how things work out. We came here for peace, but we ended up having to fight for it." I nodded, taking her hand in mine. "But we fought for what was right. And in the end, that's what matters." As we sat there in the quiet of the evening, I realized how much we had been through and how far we had come. Sarah had been my partner, my equal, every step of the way. And through it all, we had learned something profound, that true heroes don't seek recognition or praise. They serve quietly, professionally, and with honor, no matter the cost. And as the stars began to twinkle overhead, I knew that our fight wasn't just about a stolen uniform or a fraudulent HOA president. It was about standing up for what's right, no matter how difficult the journey. Because in the end, truth always prevails. And with that, I knew Sarah and I had found something far more valuable than any perfect neighborhood ever could: peace, justice, and the unwavering strength to stand tall in the face of adversity. Thanks for watching, and until next time.